Hey everyone, welcome to the Harlan Cohen podcast. I'm Harlan Cohen and I'm here with Elizabeth Hamblet, one of my favorite people. Elizabeth is an expert on helping parents and students to navigate the transition to life in college. 7 Steps to College Success, a pathway for students with disabilities. This is her book, and my copy has some stains. I don't know if you could see those of you watching the video podcast. There was food on the cover. I had to clean it off, which is a sign that this is a book that is legitimately my go-to. And Elizabeth is my go-to person when it comes to supporting students and parents down this path. Elizabeth, it's great to see you.
Oh, thank you, Harlan. It is always such a privilege and a pleasure to get to visit with you. So thank you very much. And I too have a bunch of beaten up looking books, which is an expression of my admiration for them, my use of them, and
Yeah.
I know you're not supposed to eat it or drink at your desk. My keyboard is sort of a hazmat site, and so are my books. So
That's a sign.
it's,
Like if someone has a book that's stained and has, I think
yeah.
especially if your book has food, uh, food is like a sign of I am so engaged, I can't put this down because there's a lot of competition when it comes to attention. So Elizabeth is going to help parents today to understand some of the myths, some of the expectations that parents have who have been supporting their students who have IEPs, students who have 504 plans. In high school, it can be different than college. And a lot of parents don't understand. Oh, you know what I just thought of? And I want to get to all of these myths. We're going to get to this. We're going to keep it tight today. Keep saying that because I am really talking to myself. But Elizabeth,
Yes.
when a student who has had accommodations
Hmm.
goes to college
Yeah.
and wants to register with the Office for Students with Disabilities, or however the office is named, and we'll get to the whole word disability because some people don't like that word, but it's
Hmm.
an important word. But when a student wants to register, do they need to get reassessed in order to get accommodations in college, or can the evaluations, the IEP, 504, can that be used to support their need in college?
So that is a question that can only be answered by the Disability Services Office of the college the student will attend. And I am working right now on a column that I write for a journal, and I was just looking at different colleges' disability services site, and I happened to see that one school said that um, for learning disabilities, for instance, testing has to be within the last 2 to 3 years. And then there are colleges that don't place any age limits on how old documentation can be. Some colleges, and there is a study that looked at, I think, 100 websites and found that 10 of them, or 10%, said that they would take just an IEP or a 504. So it's all over the map. And what parents can do right now is, and part of the reason we were going to sit down and talk now was for parents of high school seniors who are college bound in the fall, things that they should be thinking about right now, and they can be doing while the acceptances are coming in or they're waiting. So they can go on the disability services sites of all the colleges that their student applied to and check the documentation requirements and start to get a sense of what they will need, and they may find that they're really similar or different.
So that's so interesting because I didn't think that they, I didn't think that was ever even something that needed to be done
Mm.
to access those services. So for parents and for students, I would love for students to listen, especially students. You need to learn how to advocate for yourself. This information is
Mhm.
so important, but you need to check what did you call the disability services? What you used the terminology.
So when you get to their site on the college's site, you should be able to find, and thank you for pointing this out. So we use the term documentation requirements, and documentation in this context simply means paperwork that shows that your student has a disability. And I do want to say, and thank you for asking me this question, because way too often while traveling the internet. I see people authoritatively say to each other, oh, it has to be testing within the last 3 years. And again, that is true in some places because I've seen it, but it's also not true in a lot of places. So anybody telling you authoritatively, besides myself, of course, that
Right.
they know, well, but that they know exactly what you need at every college is telling you they actually don't know how this works. Because we're allowed to, we meaning colleges, make our own documentation requirements.
Thank you for that. There's a lot of misinformation when it
Yes.
comes to
Yes.
guiding parents, and being a credible source is something that I really pride myself on. And filtering through that can be really difficult, especially when there's so many different rules and policies in different
Yes.
schools. So it isn't universal. So really having that understanding is important. Okay. So I'm glad we established that.
Oh,
Now,
I want to say
yeah,
one more thing because
you
you
get
know me.
10 more things. Yes.
Okay, well, just this. So even at the colleges that will accept your student's IEP or 504 as like no other paperwork is needed, the thing you need to know though is it doesn't mean that they are now going to follow your student's IEP or 504 plan. So we can address that as a separate myth if you want, but I do want to make sure that that's clear.
I would love to address that as a separate myth because I think
Okay.
that that is a really important aspect. And I think it also can be a source of anxiety
Yeah,
for a
sure.
lot of families. And I want to make sure they understand. And I think that we need to just take a step back in time
Hmm.
and start off with, okay, a parent of a high school student, they have helped, advocated,
Yeah,
been
of
a
course.
resource. So where do they need to start in terms of reality versus expectations and the gap, which is really where the myth is?
So that is a big, wide question. Let's start with a couple of important points to make. First of all, parents do whatever they do for their students out of love and with the best of intentions. All parents want their students to be as successful as possible, and they express their love by advocating for them in a lot of cases and making sure that they have everything that they need. And so understood, and that is why sometimes this transition to college, as you said, can be anxiety provoking for some folks because maybe they don't know anything about the environment or they've heard some things. It's also really important to say that colleges do provide accommodations and for all kinds of disabilities. So it doesn't have to be what we call an apparent disability that I can observe, like you are blind or you are deaf, or you're a wheelchair user, but also for the non-apparent ones, so autism, learning disabilities, mental health disabilities. So that's really important. But having established that, as we, you know, I think we've said, and if not, because we've had a couple of conversations today already, um, the colleges are subject to different laws. And so when your student is in high school, they have an IEP, if they have one, under IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And if they have a 504 plan, they have that under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Now, IDEA does not apply to colleges. And so any plan written under IDEA can be submitted, as we talked about, perhaps as a form of documentation to show this is a student who had these services under this, disability. But it doesn't mean that we have to then follow anything written in it. And the same is true for 504. And that's confusing because this is one of those myths that parents will hear too. We are subject to a different part of 504. We are subject to subpart E, and K through 12 is subpart D. And you can go online when you're done listening to this and you can see the text of the law, and it's very different for colleges than it is for K through 12. And so, for the same reason, essentially, 504 plans aren't valid either. They may be used as a form of documentation, but I see parents advising each other or professionals sometimes to move your kid to a 504 plan for senior year because 504 is valid, is over oh my goodness, is in play, sorry, at college. And therefore, people think that means we have to provide whatever is written into a 504 plan. And they're saying, what accommodations should you make sure you get into the 504 so that this college, it does not work that way.
Okay, very helpful. So it's very clear there are different laws, whether you have an IEP or a 504 plan in high school, it doesn't apply in college.
Right.
So to touch on parents and students who might be feeling a little uncomfortable or
Yeah.
anxious about
Mhm.
this idea of now you're untethered in a sense.
Mm.
No one is required to do anything for you until you share your documentation and you go through the proper process. So now, and I don't want to jump, if I'm jumping ahead, you bring me back, okay?
Okay.
But
Well, I may have forgotten part of your question, so let's
well,
roll with it.
I haven't asked it yet. So
Okay.
the question is, for those parents who are anxious, knowing that this doesn't apply, in terms of the school's response, because
Hmm.
I've read and researched this. Should a parent be concerned? Are schools, colleges typically responsive to the previous plan in supporting students?
So, and I know we talked about this the last time. I try to be really careful about generalizing because data is really non-existent on so much of this stuff. So, um, there are lots of, and I want to be clear too, we provide accommodations. I want to keep trying to emphasize the positive. We provide accommodations across any program we provide. So academics, housing, dining services, recreation. If we offer it, it has to be made accessible. But where the tension can come is, and it's often expressed by folks in my field, the difference between K through 12 IDEA really emphasizing students being successful in that environment and providing what they need to make sure that happens versus our mandate, which is to provide access, which a lot of my colleagues would say, it consists of removing barriers and leveling the playing field. But sometimes what happens for students in K through 12 that families see as really important are accommodations that support students to the level that allow them to earn certain grades or, not have, have lots of chances to revise things or to take tests over to, again, often to get that grade. And that's not what our accommodations are about. And in fact, in the language of the law says it that the intent or the purpose of accommodations is to provide equal opportunity for students to achieve, but not to essentially guarantee it. What parents can start thinking about now is what are the supports that your students have? What are they, doing for your students? It's a good time to start learning about the accommodations that are commonly approved at the college level, and sort of seeing if there's quite a gap between, high school accommodations and college accommodations. And, I never ever want to suggest that anybody takes something away from a student who needs it. But if they cannot achieve certain ends at high school, whatever those are that you are aiming for, without certain accommodations, the leap to college may be very challenging, and there may need to be some steps in between. Or now is the time to start having your students start, trying things out, and maybe they need a little direct instruction to help them do things like take their own notes in class if they're not doing that, because there's a chance that they will not get copies of a note taker's notes, and very often not copies of professor's notes in college.
Yeah. So those are the things that a student is used to may not be as accessible and available in college.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really important not to make those assumptions, but to reach
Mm-hmm.
out to the proper, the people who are in these offices, the director, the support staff, and really get a handle on what it is that is going to be offered, what's realistic. And
Right.
a lot of times it is in alignment with what you're used to, but a lot of times it may not be.
Yeah, and I think too, it's about the expectations that we have for college students. They have to self-manage their time, right? They've got to get themselves to class. We don't have dorm monitors who go through and wake everybody up to make sure they get to class. They have to fill out forms on time, and if they don't get the stuff that they're looking for. Housing, for instance, there are students, I see this in my community all the time, who have serious needs for certain kinds of housing because of a physical disability, for instance. And um, sometimes they don't even alert the college about that until they are, 2 weeks from moving in. And then in that case, when it's truly a physical disability, this college has to scramble and accommodate and move somebody around to get them in. But when it comes to what might not be considered such an urgent case, that student might not be, even if they're found eligible, the school may not have the housing that they, have been approved for because they just, they didn't do it in time.
Right. Well, I think that's a great myth. It's related to how quickly a student can be accommodated. And if you can speak to the timeline
Yeah.
and what a lot of expectations are versus the reality, I think that'd be really helpful.
Sure. So I think first of all, I think was part of your question that maybe I didn't get to. Um, for a student to even be considered for eligibility for college accommodations, they have to follow the registration process for the college's office. So to be really clear, and I talk about this in the book, and there's some free stuff on my website. Colleges are not going to ask your student if they have a disability because that is against the law. So it is your student's choice whether or not to disclose their disability. And we don't have time today. We can do another whole one on transcripts if you want. But essentially, nothing coming from your public district for certain will indicate that your student had a disability, um, unless they took a class where the curriculum was modified. Like, for instance, they didn't read the same books as their friends in the mainstream classes. So um, even if your student does disclose their disability in the admissions process, that's not registering. So they have to locate again that office online, find the registration process, usually fill out a form, and sometimes often with from what I've seen, have a meeting with DS staff, and then the accommodations. Hopefully they're found eligible. Hopefully all of their requests are approved. I can't promise everybody that, but timelines. So a lot of schools suggest and welcome students to do that before the classes start. Sometimes they can do it the summer before they even arrive because that way, when they get there, everything is in place. But they don't have to. So be aware, colleges, we don't have the child find mandate of IDEA. It's not our job to reach out and find students who might have a disability and ask them to register. We do communicate that at a lot of universities, but that's up to them. And then once they do that, it can take anywhere from a few days to a few weeks for that process. So at colleges all over the country, in the week before midterms, suddenly there are a whole bunch of students who want to register with us who didn't, and they started. That's fine, but we're not going to rush our processes because
Right.
they waited.
It's interesting you
And
said processes instead of processes.
it is.
We recorded for full disclosure, we recorded. I did this thing where in all fairness, I didn't hit record, but I did ask Elizabeth. I said, I need you to be my fail safe because I did this once and I recorded a whole thing and we had such a engaging conversation. I was like, I didn't record it. And we talked about processes versus processes. And is the word processes a real word, Elizabeth? Like, is it recognized as a correct term?
Well, see, the pronunciation of the spelling of the word, I believe, is consistent, but when people say processes, it is my understanding they are mispronouncing it. There is no
Yeah.
reason for that last E to be long.
I looked it up and
Yes.
it's not a word. And because I've had a lot of like professors and I think I've even used it to try and look smart. And it's not a real word. So it's interesting. Just
Yes.
as a side note, okay, I had to interrupt you, which is so annoying because I'm sure people are like, why are you interrupting all this really important information that
I
Elizabeth
think
is
Yeah, I think your fans and those of us who love you enjoy these little side trips. But yeah, timelines are not things that we have to adjust for students. And sometimes, so even once your students register with us, if they get approved and everything's groovy, then if they want to get accommodated on that midterm, they waited until a week before, to start this process. They usually have to fill out a form that tells us when their exam is and provides us with all the information our office needs to make that happen. And so
Right.
we talked initially too about these changes. Unlike in K through 12, it is not our job to know which classes your students are taking, to reach out to the professors and ask them when they're giving exams. It's not professors' job to know who in their class is registered and what accommodations they have and communicate to us. Your children are adults in the eyes of the law if they are registered at college. This is not about dual enrollment where they're still in K through 12 plus us. This is if you're registered at college, you're an adult, even if you're not 18 yet.
Okay, so the myth that how a student interacted with their instructors is going to be the same way they interact in college, and the responsibilities in terms of how they're accommodated and the instructors and support staff being really proactive. That is not how it typically works
Right.
in a college environment, which I think is really important because
Yeah.
so many, I mean, I have ADHD. I really, the executive functioning piece, I really struggle with.
Hmm.
I have gotten incredible, like I'm so much better. It's funny, like the reason I forgot recording again is because of my brain. It's like my brain doesn't always do the things I want it to do the way I want it to do it. So that's where having those having those tools, having those practices, having
Hmm.
those habits where a parent can really start to think, if my student doesn't have this level of support, how can they advocate for themselves? How can they manage their time, their responsibilities? And in that, when they're there, like if they struggle in that aspect, what do you suggest a student do? What do you suggest a parent do?
Well, I here's what the hope is for this conversation, that we get families and professionals to work with students now while they're still in high school so that these processes are not so much of an issue for them when they get there, that they've built the independence, that they've built the strategies. So generally when I start, and I'm not picking on you, but like when it's my Zoom call and I know I have to record it, I have a post-it that I put up on the screen that's bright green that says record and transcript. So that is a strategy I have had to adopt because I have failed to record certain conversations I've had. So thinking about all of this stuff, you know, I have heard tale of students who are in high school whose job it is to tell their case manager when they have a test rather than having the teacher and case manager communicate, to start building those skills.
Yeah,
A lot of our students are walking around with smartphones, and if are old enough to remember, before there was a smartphone, there was a PDA, a personal digital assistant that
yeah,
people used, and I love that name because that's what a phone is.
yeah,
There are so many built-in tools that we can use, but we have to make it students' job to start utilizing what's at their fingertips rather than doing it for them. So,
yeah,
I know enough about myself that when I'm working, I'm going to forget that I have something to do. So I set it up so I hold the side button and it says remind me to
yeah.
do this at that hour, so it'll pop up on my phone
Yeah.
and it'll be unavoidable.
It's interesting. Since I was diagnosed, I've been really working to do those things. And even, with the post-it,
Mm-hmm.
even when you said that, I felt shame. And I know
Mm.
you didn't mean to. I'm just being honest.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I felt so bad because I set a reminder. I had an audio
Mm-hmm.
reminder. I said, make sure recorded at our dedicated time. I had it set for 5 minutes after.
Yeah. Oh,
And then
wow. Okay. Yeah.
yeah, I did. And then I shared it with you. But I'm not saying it was your thing. And this is like the reason I'm even unpacking this is because this is going to be new for a lot of students. They're going to make mistakes. I
Right.
just made a mistake, and you know what? I'm not going to feel shame.
No.
What I'm going to do is come up with a third fail safe
Correct. Right.
because
Right.
and um I've talked to parents who wake up their kids, and they wake up
Mm,
their kids because they feel like they are helping them and supporting them. And if your kid cannot get up senior year by themselves
yep.
and you constantly have to be the one, the expectation that they're going to get themselves out of bed is a myth.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah. Yeah, and you and I were talking previously about the word entitlement. I would like to suggest to parents that going straight to college after high school is not an entitlement. And so when we talk about this, if they are not able to get themselves up senior year of high school,
Right.
I agree with you that the chances they will do that in college are probably slim, in which case you can say to them, if you're paying, I am not paying for you to go away to college next year if you cannot at least get yourself up and out of the door. And maybe they can, accept and defer, for a
Right.
year, and they can take a job in the meantime where they have to get a job where they have to be somewhere. But
Yeah.
these are real
Yeah.
stakes that we're
It's a really
talking about.
important question. I don't know if you have a resource like this.
Yeah.
And if you don't, it'd be so cool to have it of like,
Okay.
you know, what is it, 10 questions or 10 things that your students should ask themselves before going to college
Mm,
in terms of
okay.
like readiness of like, can you do these things? Because
Yeah.
you can't do these 10 things or however many things, and you get to school and you expect that someone else is going to do those things for you or
Hmm.
continue to do those things for you. You're going to be set up to struggle. And I think that in all fairness, that a lot of parents and a lot of students don't really know the things that they need to be able to do in
Hmm.
order to support themselves to manage all of the change, right? Like,
Yeah.
in a sense, they're set up to fail and struggle because they're not adequately informed about what they need to do in terms of supporting themselves, being self advocates, creating those support systems. Because for me, when I'm advising parents and students to set themselves up for a smooth transition, it's what do you want, what makes you uncomfortable, people, places, patience. So in terms of
Hmm.
a student who has received accommodations and a student who needs to continue to receive those or expect those, you need to start by going to the people and the places before school starts, before you commit, and have an understanding of what resources are available and can my student access those?
Yeah. And the access point is a really important one. So I have a great job that I love. I work one-on-one with students registered with a university's disability services office. And the way that they get an appointment with me is they get an email saying, "Hey, do you want to meet with Elizabeth?" And sometimes they never respond to the initial outreach.
Right.
Sometimes they do, and I follow up and I say, "Here's what I have available," and they never respond. Sometimes they respond, we make a time, I open the Zoom, and they're not there. And again, it happens to all of us. We've all missed meetings, etc. But I will send a follow up, and sometimes I never hear from them on the follow up. So this is this is also part all of this discussion that we're having about how do we, what should parents be thinking about? Is your student seeking out help? Are you just providing it? They don't. It's frictionless for them. They sit down every afternoon at the house, and somebody shows up to help them organize. They sit down at school once one period a day, and somebody there says, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." How do we turn this into they make the appointments, with the tutor or whoever, the executive functioning coach, if that's what you're doing outside. At school, the person, if they're lucky enough to have a resource room period, instead of the teacher by senior year saying, and now we're going to do this, asking the student, okay, you sat down. What
Right.
do you have to do today? You tell me what we're doing. You organize it.
Yeah. I think that, just as you're talking, I
Yeah.
think I think that for those seniors in high school, like it would be really cool if there was that resource of like, here are those things that you should be able to do on your own right now. And then it doesn't, because then it doesn't have to necessarily be like, more of like punitive, like I'm paying for this, and if you don't do this, then this is what's going to happen. But it's more of like, that eventually gets, I could see that being a conversation after a student isn't able or isn't motivated to do the things on that list.
Yeah.
But it's like if you can't get yourself up your senior year or second semester senior year,
Yeah.
um, then the question is, how do you expect to get yourself up when you're in school? And what I would like, so that I feel really comfortable supporting you, is to see that you can do those things so that I have the confidence and you have the confidence to be able to take care of yourself.
So I want to do a little name drop here. Kelly Shallon is a transition specialist that I have had the privilege of getting to know and become friends with. And just this week, she put up 31 31 essential questions for assessing college readiness. So
Oh,
somebody's already done the hard work, and Kelly is
okay.
very, very good. And I will
Hey,
send you
Kelly,
that link for the
you
show
know what?
notes.
We should
So
talk
it
to Kelly
covers
then.
academics, it covers executive functioning. Can they break down, long-term assignments, self-advocacy? Um, can they, create goals for themselves, social readiness, essential life skills? So there are lots of great resources. So luckily for me, I just get to refer you to people. But it's so excellent. And so I think, not all parents I recognize went to college themselves, but this can be a great opportunity to like reflect on your own experience when you went to college and
Yeah,
thinking about the level of independence. And again, we're not going for perfection.
right.
What we're trying to do here is at least get them independent enough that you don't have to worry that they're eventually going to report to you that they are on probation after the first term because they didn't go to class and therefore, they did not do well. And the college is going to give them one more semester to get their GPA up. The
Right.
damage that that does, certainly financially, if they get, dismissed because they aren't earning credits if things are
Yeah.
that bad, but to their self-esteem, when the answer wasn't you are never going to be able to do college, it was you went at a time you weren't ready yet.
Yeah. This is great. So I'm excited to share this resource. I pulled it up while we were chatting. Um, and the 31 must have a college readiness skill. So we'll share that. Do you know Kelly? Are you familiar? Like, have you visited with Kelly?
She and I just had an hour-long chat this morning. That's why I'm smiling.
Oh my gosh. So Kelly would be a good person for me to talk to
She
on
would
the
be a great
podcast.
person for you to talk to. She
Oh,
is very, very smart, and she shares so much information. You would love her, Harlan. I love her. She puts
okay.
stuff up, and I think, wow, I wish I'd thought of that. That's great. So she's just a really experienced professional who understands this
Yeah.
process inside and out. And as a fellow professional, I really admire her work.
Yeah.
So
And another thing about you that I really respect is every conversation we have, you introduce me to someone who is a
yeah,
resource. And the thing about you is you're not afraid to not have the answers.
yeah,
And you actually, I think, take a lot of pride, and it gives you joy to direct people to other individuals, experts. And I think what we have to do in the show notes, maybe we'll include some of your favorite go-to people,
sure.
because I
I'll do
really
that.
feel like that's really wonderful as well. And I know we're at the end of our time, and just to follow through one last myth,
Yeah.
something that you feel parents and students really need to understand. Can you give me one more, or something that you share that's kind of your go-to?
Okay. Oh, just the one. That's always hard. I think we've covered accommodations and they're going to be one I guess one thing to make sure we get in, and I've alluded to this. Accommodations may be different at college because of the changing mandates. And in fact, there are four categories of things that colleges don't have to provide. And so I think probably the two that matter the most for the most people are that we don't have to provide anything that's a personal service or device. We just alluded to supports. Students with disabilities aren't entitled to specialized academic support, executive functioning support. A college can choose to provide those, but they don't have to. And if they do, they can charge for them. Um, and they also don't have to provide, for instance, more tutoring hours every week than a student with, who doesn't have a disability has, or if tutoring is one tutor to every 5 students, they're not entitled to one-on-one. And so starting to get those ideas. And also there are some accommodations we don't have to provide because they fundamentally alter what we're measuring. And so it's important to start doing a deep dive on those kinds of things. I think, we talked about retaking tests for a higher grade. That is not one of these exceptions, but the expectations for college students too figures into this whole picture. So,
Right.
it's independence on every level, the living
Yep.
level, self-management,
Right. I think
emotional maturity.
I think this is so important to have this conversation and to really have parents understand expectations that are realistic and students as well, and reaching out to those offices during the spring, during a admitted student day event, doing a virtual meeting, and a parent doing it with their student as an initial, but then how do you feel about when does that student take over?
Yeah, 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 exactly, Harlan, exactly. And here's the thing, and this is the last thing I want to leave folks with. I am a parent too. I have adult children now, but I everything about, the next step can be anxiety provoking, as I said. You will feel better and your student will feel better if they've had some practice adulting, doing all of the things that we're
Right.
talking about. And it's that confidence that I want them to have. And we build confidence through competence.
Right. Right.
Competence builds confidence.
And it starts before they get to campus.
It should.
Yeah,
Should.
and we're gonna help prepare them. So Elizabeth is in your corner, and I'm in your corner. And Elizabeth,
Absolutely.
if someone wants to stay in touch with you, if they want to learn more about what you do and access your resources, what's the best way for them to find you?
So they can go directly to my website. It's ldadvisory.com. But if they just look for my name, my last name is Hamblet, Hamblet. Hopefully my site will come up. And from there, go to free resources, and there are 50 plus blog posts that they can read all about this. The book is my most complete, thorough way to tell you everything you need to know about the college environment. Thank you, Harlan, and how to prepare students. I've got 2 on-demand webinars if you'd rather watch them read, which I know a lot of people would rather do. I do presentations for school districts if you want to share this information with anybody else. And there's a short guide too for your student, a 6-page guide for, a reader's digest, if you will, about all of the important points. But I, like you, am on social media. So, that's an option too. And I send out a free newsletter twice a month for people who don't want to do any of those things. So I want to make it easy to get you information.
You really do, and you have such great information, and I'm just grateful that you are able to share your time and your expertise. And I know that we're going to have more conversations, and I really appreciate you, and thank you for being here with us.
Well, I always appreciate you and thank you so much. And I feel the same way about all of your work.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Harlan.